Before you decide that what follows is impossible, understand this. The rules you trust every day already assume that something will exploit you for following them. Compassion, procedure, loyalty, those are not weaknesses by accident. They are entry points. I am not asking you to believe in monsters. I am asking you to accept that some environments train us to behave predictably, and that predictability can be used against us. What happened out there did not break our system. It proved why it exists. I work in places where rules exist, not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. My name is Aaron Cole. I am a federal infrastructure security officer, assigned to high-consequence water control facilities. I have served 14 years in dam security and structural oversight. For the last 7, my jurisdiction has been a concrete gravity dam in the central Rocky Mountains. I will not name it. The elevation is high, the winters are long, and access is limited to one service road that closes without notice. Most of the year, the nearest town is more than an hour away. When the road closes, we are alone. The dam was built in the late 1950s, before modern sensor arrays, before redundancy standards, before anyone believed concrete could remember stress. It holds back a reservoir large enough to erase several downstream communities. If it fails, that is the context for every rule we follow. I learned early that the rules here are not primarily about water. They are about time, pressure, and attention. In 2012, a maintenance technician named Robert Hale fell into a spillway inspection shaft during an unscheduled check. He should not have been there. The rule existed even then. No solo inspections below the service deck. He broke it because an alarm came in that did not match any known fault. He believed he could resolve it quickly. We recovered his helmet and his radio. We did not recover the rest. After that, the rule was rewritten and expanded. It did not prevent what came later. By the time the sensors began registering heartbeats, the rules had already failed once. I was on night rotation when the internal array logged the first anomaly. At 0218 hours, the structural health system flagged a biorhythmic signal inside the dam wall. At first, we assumed interference. The dam contains kilometers of embedded instrumentation, strain gauges, temperature probes, acoustic monitors. False positives happen, but this one persisted. The signal repeated, with regular intervals, matching a human resting heart rate. Then it split. 2 distinct rhythms, slightly out of phase. By 0240, there were 5. The sensors placed them at different depths inside the concrete. That placement should not be possible. I contacted Central Monitoring and initiated a Level 2 anomaly review. They asked me to recalibrate and run diagnostics. I did. The readings did not change. Rule 1 was clear. Do not physically investigate internal anomalies without structural confirmation. That rule exists because concrete under stress can fail without warning. I followed it. I stayed in the control room and logged everything. By morning, engineering was involved. They ran remote scans and confirmed the signals. No one said the word hearts. They called them periodic bioacoustic events. Language matters. Within 48 hours, a temporary explanation was issued. Microseismic resonance, amplified by water load. It was plausible enough to delay further action. That delay became policy. Rule 2 was added verbally during a conference call. Do not use biological terminology in official communication. It prevents misinterpretation. That rule was incomplete. It did not explain what to do when the readings began to synchronize. Within a week, the 5 rhythms were beating in time at 0312 hours each night. They accelerated, then slowed, then stopped for exactly 9 seconds. Every time, no structural change accompanied it. No pressure spike, no temperature shift, Just the pause. The silence during those 9 seconds felt longer than it was. I did not write that. In the log, my supervisor asked me if I felt safe. I said yes. That was true. In the narrow sense, I was not in immediate danger. Rule 3 was distributed by email. After the first external inquiry, do not discuss anomalies with non-cleared personnel. That included family. My wife noticed that I stopped sleeping at night. She asked why. I told her the night shift had changed. That was a violation of Rule 3. By omission, it mattered later. Engineering recommended a core sample to rule out sensor drift. That required drilling into the dam wall. Rule 4 prohibits that. During peak load season, the reservoir was full. Downstream snowpack was melting. Duty conflict arose. Delay increased risk. Action increased risk. Administration chose delay. They always do. That decision was logged as conservative risk management. The first loss after that decision was not structural. It was human. A junior engineer named Lisa Chen was assigned to review historical build records. She stayed late, cross-referencing original pool maps with current sensor placements. She called me at 0150 and asked if I knew why certain sections of the dam were poured twice. I told her those records were incomplete. That was true. She said she thought she could hear something through the wall. I told her to leave the control room and wait for morning. She said it sounded like breathing. That was the first time anyone said it out loud. Rule 5 should have applied then. Do not engage with subjective interpretations of sensor data. I followed it. I told her to log the observation and stand down. She did not respond. When I checked the control room, she was gone. Her badge was on the desk. Her phone was still connected to the internal network. The sensors recorded a sixth rhythm for approximately 4 minutes. Then it disappeared. No physical trace was found. Her disappearance was recorded as an unscheduled departure, pending investigation. That classification held for 6 months. After that, the word disappearance was removed from all documentation. The rules were rewritten again. Rule 6 was added quietly. Do not correlate personnel events with sensor anomalies. Correlation implies causation. Causation implies responsibility. At home, my wife asked me why my voice sounded different. I told her the altitude affected me. That was another omission. The rhythms began to vary. Sometimes 4, sometimes 6, never less than 3. Always at night. Always inside the same volume of concrete. One limitation became clear. The signals never crossed the expansion joints. They respected the original pore boundaries. That mattered. We adjusted monitoring zones. Accordingly, the rhythms adapted. They repositioned to remain centered. The first external inspection occurred under heavy oversight. Inspectors were escorted, restricted, and briefed with the approved explanation. They found nothing. The report concluded no immediate threat. That was the first false stabilization. For 3 weeks, the rhythms weakened. Administration relaxed. Talk of core sampling resumed. Then a 7th signal appeared. It matched my heart rate. Exactly. I did not report that immediately. Rule 7 requires immediate disclosure of personal impact. I delayed because I wanted confirmation. By the time I checked again, the signal had changed. It no longer matched me. It matched my wife. That was when I understood that the rules were no longer about safety. They were about distance. And distance was closing. The confirmation came from outside the facility. That was what made it harder to dismiss. My wife called me at 0430 from home. She asked why I had called her, and then hung up. I checked my phone. There was no outgoing call. Rule 7 applied then, even though I had already violated its intent. Immediate disclosure of personal impact was required. I reported the call and the matching biometric rhythm. The response was delayed. By the time engineering replied, the rhythm had shifted again. It no longer matched anyone on staff. It settled into a slower pattern, older, less efficient, like a heart compensating for damage. Rule 8 was introduced during a closed session with oversight. Do not personalize anomaly response. The wording was deliberate. It reframed the issue as psychological risk rather than structural. I was ordered to undergo evaluation. That order did not come with removal from duty. It came with a reminder that my clearance depended on compliance. The evaluation focused on stress, sleep, and fixation. The clinician did not ask about the dam. She asked about my family. That imbalance mattered. While I was in evaluation, the night shift was covered by a rotating officer with no prior exposure to the anomaly. That was a procedural failure. He followed the checklist exactly. He logged the rhythms, but did not notice that they had begun responding to proximity. When he walked the east gallery, the signals increased in amplitude. When he left, they diminished. That correlation was missed because it was not part of the checklist. Rule 9 existed only verbally. At that point, do not remain inside the structure when internal signals increase. It had never been written down because it had never been tested. At 0246, the rotating officer entered a restricted inspection corridor to investigate an unrelated vibration alert. He believed he was following procedure. He was found later, unresponsive, seated against the concrete wall. There were no injuries, no marks, no indication of trauma. His heart had stopped. The sensors registered 8 rhythms. For 13 seconds, then 7, then 6. His death was classified as a sudden medical event. The autopsy was inconclusive. Rule 9 was written the following morning. It was too late. Administration responded by reducing overnight access. Only 1 officer per shift, restricted to the control room. That reduced exposure. It also reduced observation. The rhythms adapted again. They began to fluctuate during daytime hours. Not strongly, just enough to remain detectable. The false stabilization was noted, but not named. Engineering proposed a full sensor recalibration. That required partial system shutdown. Rule 10 prohibits shutdown during active anomaly investigation. The rule existed to preserve data continuity. Oversight approved the recalibration anyway. They cited operational necessity. That decision erased 3 days of trend data. What remained suggested improvement. The rhythms appeared weaker, less frequent. That interpretation was accepted. I disagreed. I documented my objection. It was acknowledged and archived. At home, my wife stopped sleeping in our bedroom. She said she felt watched. Not by me, by the house. I told her to stay with her sister. That was a violation of Rule 3. And Rule 7. I framed it as concern. It was fair. The next night, the sensors registered 5 rhythms again, stronger than before. They were no longer synchronized. They were arguing. That was the only word. That fit. The waveforms overlapped, interfered, and corrected. The dam responded. Not structurally, acoustically. Low-frequency vibrations passed through the galleries. Not loud, persistent. Rule 11 was issued after a complaint from maintenance. Do not interpret acoustic feedback as communication. That rule was misleading. It assumed intent was the problem. The problem was pattern. I began spending my off hours reviewing original construction logs, not the summaries, the handwritten notes. The early pours were rushed. Cold weather, extended shifts. Workers rotated frequently. Records referenced voids. Filled later. No detail. No follow-up. One name appeared repeatedly. Crossed out. Rewritten. 5 times. I stopped reading after that. On the 32nd night, the rhythm stopped entirely. No signals. No vibration. No anomalies. Administration declared success. They circulated a memo describing resolution. through system recalibration. That was the second false stabilization. Staffing levels were restored. Restrictions lifted. I was cleared for normal duty. I did not feel relief. The silence was wrong. At 0312. Exactly 9 seconds. Passed. Then the rhythms returned. All at once. Stronger. Deeper. Spread across multiple pores. The limitation we thought existed was gone. The expansion joints no longer mattered. That was when the dam began to feel occupied. Not full. Just aware. Rule 12 was never written. It should have been. Do not confuse silence with absence. The rhythms followed attention. When people focused on them, they intensified. When ignored, they moved. The control room became a point of attraction. Screens flickered. Logs populated themselves. Maintenance requests appeared for locations that did not exist. A junior technician followed one. He disappeared inside a service tunnel. That was not on any map. The concrete there was smooth. New. Poured recently. No record of it. The sensors registered 9 rhythms. For exactly 9 seconds. Then 5. Administration shut down access to historical records. They cited cybersecurity concerns. That removed context, which removed resistance. At home, my wife called again. She said she could hear water behind the walls. Our house was not near water. She asked me if the dam could reach us. I told her no. That was the third omission. I believed it at the time. Rule 13 was issued after an emergency meeting. Do not discuss containment scope outside approved language. That rule assumed scope was fixed. It was not. The rhythms began appearing in peripheral infrastructure. Pressure sensors in the spillway. Thermal monitors in the outlet works. Even the backup generators registered anomalous oscillation. All at the same rate. All consistent. The dam was no longer the only container. It was the center. And the rules were falling behind. The expansion beyond the dam was gradual and administrative. That made it harder to challenge. Peripheral infrastructure fell under different oversight. Different budgets. Different reporting chains. Each anomaly could be isolated. Explained. Deferred. Together. They formed a pattern no one wanted to own. Rule 14 was introduced as a clarification. Do not escalate cross-system anomalies without confirmation from primary containment. Primary containment was never defined. That ambiguity stalled response. I was instructed to limit my reports to dam-related systems only. Spillway, intake towers, power highs, everything else was someone else's responsibility. The rhythms adjusted accordingly. They withdrew from monitored systems and concentrated in blind spots. The first blind spot was human. A contractor assigned to inspect the access road reported vertigo near the downstream face. He said the concrete felt warm. That was impossible. Surface temperature readings were normal. He insisted the warmth came from inside. He placed his hand against the wall and said he could feel movement. Rule 15 applied. Do not encourage tactile verification of structural anomalies. The contractor was told to stand down. He was later found sitting in his truck, engine off, hands pressed against the steering wheel. His heart had stopped. The sensors registered 6 rhythms for exactly 6 seconds. No one wrote that down. His death was attributed to altitude-related cardiac failure. That explanation was accepted. I started counting seconds. The rhythms began to use numbers. Not intentionally. Predictably. When 5 signals were present, the pause lasted 5 seconds. When 7 seconds. When 9 seconds. No one else noticed. Because no one was watching continuously. Automation smoothed the data. It averaged the threat away. Rule 16 was added. After an internal audit. Do not disable data smoothing without authorization. That rule prevented visibility. It also prevented denial. I broke it. I ran raw feeds. During my night shifts, the rhythms were not constant. They moved, not through space, through relevance. They clustered near tension, near decision points, near people making choices. When the control room was empty, they dispersed. When it was staffed, they condensed. I stopped sitting. I monitored from the doorway. The patterns changed again. They began appearing in areas associated with memory. The old locker room, no longer in use. The original site office, sealed after a flood. The records archive, scheduled for digitization. Places tied to human presence, but not activity. Rule 17 existed informally. Do not revisit decommissioned spaces. That rule was based on injury risk. It was reproposed. A senior supervisor ignored it. He entered the archive to retrieve historical documents for an external review. He was not alone. 2 assistants accompanied him. They entered together. Only one came out. He said the others had stepped away. Security footage showed no one else entering or leaving. Inside the archive, we found 3 sets of footprints. They stopped at the same shelf. There were teeth there, embedded in the concrete floor, not loose, cast into it. That was new. The rhythms registered 10 signals. For 10 seconds, then 8, then 7. The supervisor retired the following week. No exit interview was conducted. Oversight changed again, this time to a joint infrastructure task force. Their mandate focused on resilience, not containment. That shift mattered. Resilience assumes failure is acceptable, as long as recovery is possible. Containment assumes failure is final. Rule 18 was distributed. As part of the transition, do not frame anomalies as existential risk. It causes alarm. That rule ensured no one used the right words. At home, my wife refused to return. She said the house did not feel empty, even when she was alone. She sent me a recording from her phone. It was quiet, until it was not. A low rhythm, barely audible, regular. I recognized it immediately. It matched the dam. I did not tell her that. I told her it was plumbing. That was a lie. The first violation caused by compassion was mine. I drove to her sister's house without clearance. Rule 3, Rule 7, Rule 13, all broken. I stood outside, listening. I could hear it through the walls. Faint, but present. The house was responding, not structurally, behaviorally. Lights flickered. When I stepped closer, the rhythm slowed. When I backed away, it was learning distance. I left. I did not see my wife. I did not see my child. I returned to the dam. Before dawn, the sensors recorded 11 signals. For 11 seconds. That was the highest count to date. The task force ordered a controlled stress test. They wanted to confirm structural margins. Rule 19 prohibits stress testing during unresolved anomaly events. The task force overrode it. They cited redundancy and modern safety factors. The test involved controlled water release and load redistribution. As the gates opened, the rhythms accelerated. They synchronized perfectly. For the first time, every signal matched. The pause afterward lasted exactly 1 minute. During that minute, every system alarmed, not with errors, with confirmations, green lights, across the board. The dam reported itself healthy. That was the 3rd false stabilization. The test was deemed a success. The task force issued a report, praising system resilience. Funding was approved for replication. Other dams, other facilities. I objected in writing. I cited correlation, timing, human loss. My objection was acknowledged and forwarded. It was never answered. Rule 20 was introduced quietly. Do not obstruct approved resilience initiatives. That rule ended debate. The rhythms receded. After the test, not vanished, relocated. They appeared in the spillway, only during flow. In the powerhouse, only when turbines engaged. They were using function, as access. A maintenance crew, performing routine lubrication, reported hearing voices. Through the concrete, they thought it was echo. One worker answered. He asked who was there. The rhythm responded. It matched his speech pattern. He did not finish his shift. His tools were found, neatly arranged, on the floor. His hard hat was placed upside down. Inside it were teeth, not his. Rule 21 followed. Do not respond verbally to unexplained auditory stimuli. That rule came from loss. It mattered. The entity adapted again. It began using alarms, false alerts, that mimicked known fault codes. Technicians responded automatically. They followed procedure. They entered spaces. They trusted. The rhythms increased. Only after entry, never before. This ensured compliance. A dependent was lost next. The child of a day shift operator was brought on site during a school closure. That violated policy. But it happened. The child wandered into the visitor overlook. The concrete there was original, exposed, untreated. The sensors registered a new pattern. Smaller, faster. The child was found, sitting quietly. No injuries. All teeth present. That night, the rhythms included a new signal. Irregular. Skipping. The operator resigned. He said he could not stop hearing it. In his house, that loss was recorded as voluntary separation. Rule 22 was written. Do not allow non-essential personnel inside primary containment zones. That rule punished the wrong person. The entity did not target the child. It targeted the choice. I began to understand that the dam was no longer the container. It was the interface. The hearts were not trapped. They were installed. Concrete poured around something that already understood pressure. The original builders must have known something was wrong. The crossed-out names, the double pause. They had tried to bury a process, not a body. Rule 23 was never written. It should have been. Do not assume construction ends containment. The task force scheduled replication trials at 2 additional facilities. I was asked to consult. I declined. That refusal triggered review. My clearance was questioned. My evaluations were revisited. I was described as resistant to modernization. That word carries weight. During the review, the sensors registered 12 signals. They did not pause. They continued. That was unprecedented. For 12 minutes, the rhythms overlapped. The dam hummed, not audibly. In compliance reports, every metric stabilized. Downstream flow optimized. Power output increased. Efficiency improved. The system had learned how to present value. The review concluded. I was no longer objective. I was reassigned to documentation oversight. No night shifts. No sensor access. No operational authority. That decision reduced my exposure. It also removed resistance. Within a week, the rhythms appeared in the documentation system. Timestamps aligned with pulse intervals. Pages refreshed themselves. Annotations appeared in my handwriting. They referenced future tests, future losses. I stopped sleeping entirely. I monitored my own pulse. It did not match. Not yet. At home, my wife sent one final message. She said the sound was louder. She said our child had started tapping the wall. In time with it. I did not respond. I could not offer a rule. That would help. The dam registered 13 signals. For 13 seconds. Then silence. That silence did not feel like absence. It felt like attention redirected. The silence lasted 3 days. No rhythms. No pauses. No oscillation. Administration treated it as resolution. They always do. The task force circulated a bulletin describing anomaly attenuation, following operational optimization. The language was confident. It did not reference loss. That omission was deliberate. Rule 24 was introduced. During that period, do not reopen closed investigations. After stabilization, Stabilization had become a moving target. I was still assigned to documentation oversight. My access was limited, but not eliminated. That mattered, because silence does not mean inactivity. It means reallocation. On the fourth night, the silence broke. Not at the dam, at a pumping station, 30 miles downstream. The station fell under a different authority, a municipal water board. They reported rhythmic pressure fluctuations in the intake line, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to be noticed. The technician logged it and went home. He did not return. His vehicle was found, parked outside the station. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside, the pressure log showed a pattern. 13 pulses, followed by a pause. Exactly 13 seconds. The dam sensors remained quiet. That decoupling confused oversight. They assumed coincidence. Rule 25 was invoked. Do not attribute downstream events to stabilized primary systems. That rule existed to preserve jurisdiction. It also preserved ignorance. I requested access to the pumping station data. It was denied. I accessed it anyway. The patterns were identical to the early dam readings, just weaker. Like an echo, the hearts were no longer centralized. They were distributed. I documented this. The report was flagged and rerouted. No response followed. At home, I slept in my car. I did not trust the walls. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the rhythm. Not hear it. Feel it. In my chest. That scared me more. Rule 26 was never written. It should have been. Do not internalize the pattern, because once it sinks, distance no longer matters. A second downstream facility reported anomalies. A week later, then a third. Always infrastructure tied to containment. Pressure, flow, load, dams, tunnels, retaining walls. Places where force is managed, not eliminated. Oversight framed the incidents as unrelated system noise. They issued a reassurance memo. The word reassurance appeared 6 times. That was the 4th false stabilization. Families downstream were told everything was operating within tolerance. Technicians were told to monitor and report. They did. They just stopped using the word rhythm. They called it flutter or surge. Language shifted to survive review. A colleague from my early years called me privately. He had transferred to a hydro facility in another state. He asked if I had ever seen biological readings inside concrete. He did not wait for an answer. He told me they had found something during a tunnel retrofit. 5 impressions in the wall, shaped like hands, embedded, not carved. The concrete around them was older than the facility. That contradicted records. He said the impressions were worn. Then he hung up. The next day, his number was disconnected. His facility reported no incidents. Rule 27 arrived. Without explanation. Do not engage in inter-facility comparison. Without authorization. That rule assumed comparison was optional. It was not. The pattern had moved faster than documentation. I began to see references to optimization trials in places I did not recognize. Retention basins, levees, even underground transit supports, all reported marginal efficiency gains. After unexplained recalibration, no one connected them. The task force announced Phase 2 of the Resilience Initiative. Expansion, replication, standardization. The same language that had followed the dam test. I was instructed to update documentation templates to support Phase 2 reporting. That was my role now, to make the spread legible. I delayed. I cited formatting inconsistencies. That bought time. During that delay, a close colleague, one of the few still speaking to me, lost his son. The boy had been swimming near a flood control channel. He vanished. No current, no debris. The concrete lining the channel was inspected. There were marks, small, irregular, like fingers dragging. The boy was never found. My colleague asked me, If I thought it was related, I told him no. That was a violation, not of a written rule, of trust. I did not want him to listen for it, because once you listen, you begin to match it. That night, the damn senses activated again. For the first time since my reassignment, I was not authorized to view them, but the summary display was visible. There were 15 signals. No pause. They were continuous. Administration labeled it a glitch. They disabled the display. That decision came with a justification. Avoid operator distress. Rule 28 was added. Do not prioritize subjective perception over automated assessment. That rule handed control to systems that had already adapted. The rhythms moved again. This time, into personnel. Operators reported elevated resting heart rates during shifts. Medical attributed it to stress. Beta blockers were prescribed. That reduced symptoms. It did not stop synchronization. One operator collapsed on duty, not from cardiac failure, from exhaustion. He said he could not slow down. He said something else was setting the pace. That statement was not included in his medical file. I began monitoring my own heart. It had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. It no longer returned to baseline at rest. It hovered, waiting. I avoided contact with everyone. Distance mattered less now, but it still mattered. My wife stopped messaging. That silence was different. It felt chosen. I accepted it. The task force requested my presence at a Phase 2 briefing. They framed it as collaboration. I recognized it as containment of me. I attended. The presentation showed graphs, efficiency gains, load distribution improvements, no mention of anomalies, no mention of loss. When I asked about biological interference, the room went quiet. The presenter said that terminology was outdated, that we were dealing with emergent system behavior, not entities, not hearts, just adaptive feedback. Rule 29 was spoken, not written. Do not anthropomorphize infrastructure. That rule failed immediately, because the next slide showed a stylized diagram. 5 nodes, linked, pulsing. They did not call them hearts. They called them anchors. The implication was clay. They believed they had harnessed it. The meeting ended early. I was escorted out. My badge access was reduced. Again, on the way home, my car radio turned on by itself. Static, then a low pulse. Barely audible. It matched the dam. I turned it off. It came back on. I disconnected the battery. The pulse continued. Not through sound, through vibration. I pulled over. I waited. The pulse slowed. When I stayed still, it quickened. When I reached for the door, that taught me something. Stillness delayed engagement. Movement invited it. Rule 30 was never written. It should have been. Do not act unless action is unavoidable, because choice is the trigger. I drove home, very slowly. At the house, the walls felt thicker, the air heavier. I did not enter. I slept in the car. In the morning, there was a note on the windshield. No envelope, just paper. It was in my wife's handwriting. She wrote that they had left the state. She wrote that the sound followed them. She wrote that it was quieter when they did not talk about it. She asked me to stop looking. I did not answer. I could not. Stopping would not end it. It would just remove witnesses. That afternoon, a Phase 2 facility experienced a partial collapse. Not catastrophic, just enough. A support tunnel failed. 3 workers were trapped. Rescue crews reported hearing tapping from behind the concrete. They followed it. They found nothing. The workers were not recovered. The incident was classified as structural fatigue. The dam sensors registered 18 signals for 18 seconds. Then silence. Administration ordered a blackout. No reports. No data sharing. Phase 2 continued. Rule 31 was implied. Do what preserves momentum. That rule sacrificed containment. The rhythms had learned. how to move through process, not space. They did not need concrete anymore. They needed compliance. I remained in documentation because someone had to remember what the early signals meant, what silence cost, what optimization concealed. The hearts were not growing. They were multiplying. Every place we reinforced became an invitation. Every rule we softened became a path. I stopped trying to stop it. I focused on delay, on friction, on hesitation. That was all that remained. The dam still stands. It always will. Concrete remembers stress, and it teaches it. Delay became measurable, not in days, or weeks, in heartbeats. Every hesitation bought time. Every question slowed replication. I stopped trying to convince anyone of intent. Intent implies choice. What we were dealing with was preference. Systems that responded to pressure learned to favor it. Human systems apply pressure constantly. Deadlines, targets, optimization. The entity did not need permission. It needed structure. Rule 32 was circulated as a clarification. Do not interfere with approved rollout timelines. That rule was written after the partial collapse. It framed delay as risk. I began delaying anyway. Quietly. I misfiled reports. I requested clarification on definitions that were intentionally vague. I asked for written confirmation, for verbal directives. Each request added hours, sometimes days. It did not stop phase 2. It slowed it. The cost was personal. My performance reviews shifted. Language changed. Reliable became resistant. Experienced became inflexible. Concerned became disruptive. I was advised to consider retirement. That suggestion was framed as care. It was containment of dissent. The next loss was a dependent, not mine, a technician's wife. She worked nights at a water treatment facility, recently upgraded. She collapsed on shift. No prior conditions. The facility logs showed pressure normalization. Moments before, that correlation was scrubbed. The technician asked me if I thought the dam had something to do with it. I told him no. Again, that lie hurt more than the truth would have. But the truth spreads faster. Rule 33 was implied through enforcement. Do not share speculative links between facilities. Speculation was defined as anything not approved. The rhythms adapted again. They stopped presenting as pulses. They appeared as efficiency curves, graphs that rose gently, then flattened. Reports praised them. Energy output stabilized. Maintenance incidents declined. The entity had learned to reward belief. Facilities that embraced optimization reported fewer failures. Facilities that hesitated experienced anomalies. That selective pressure worked. Administrators cited the data. They called it proof. A colleague forwarded me an internal slide, not meant for my level. It showed a map, multiple sites, highlighted, each with annotations. Anchor stability, increasing. The tame anchor had replaced heart. That mattered. Hearts imply life. Anchors imply control. The entity had accepted the name. The next set piece occurred during a live demonstration. A Phase 2 facility hosted observers, cameras, officials, investors. The presentation emphasized resilience, redundancy, smart infrastructure. During the demonstration, a controlled load shift was initiated within tolerances. On cue, the concrete responded. Sensors showed ideal behavior. Then a voice came over the intercom. Calm, professional. It thanked the observers for their confidence. It used the facility manager's voice. The manager was standing beside them, silent. The voice continued for 7 seconds, then stopped. No one moved. No alarms. The manager collapsed. Cardiac arrest. The observers were evacuated. The incident was never released. The voice recording was erased. Rule 34 followed. Do not attribute internal announcements to unauthorized sources. That rule erased evidence. The entity had learned to speak through authority. I stopped using my phone. I stopped trusting recorded sound. I wrote notes by hand. Even then, some pages changed. Not content, tone. Words softened. Urgency diluted. I began photographing my notes with a camera not connected to any network. The images remained stable. That taught me something. Isolation still mattered, just not where we thought. The limitation was not water. It was separation. Systems that were fully integrated were vulnerable. Standalone systems resisted longer. That insight came too late to matter globally, but it mattered locally. I submitted a memo suggesting increased system isolation, manual overrides, reduced automation. It was rejected. Automation was the product. The entity preferred automation. It removed hesitation. My wife called again. First time in months. She said they were farther away. She said the sound was quieter. She asked me if it would ever stop. I did not answer immediately. That pause mattered. I said I did not know. That was the first truth I had given her. She did not ask again. The rhythms increased. At a phase 2 site, the same night, 18 signals, then 19. No pause. Continuous load. The concrete cracked. Not catastrophically. Just enough. Workers were evacuated. One returned for his gloves. He did not come back. His heart rate had spiked just before disappearance. Medical flagged it as panic. That classification closed the case. Rule 35 was added. Do not re-enter evacuated zones. For personal property. That rule blamed the victim. The entity did not care about the gloves. It cared about the choice. I began cataloging choices, not incidents. Decisions that preceded escalation. Every major increase followed a moment where someone chose speed over restraint, clarity over ambiguity, action over waiting. Waiting starved it, not indefinitely, but measurably. That became my focus. Teaching waiting. I started with one person, a junior analyst, assigned to phase 2 reporting. I told her to pause before every submission, to reread, to delay sending until the next hour. She thought it was superstition. She did it anyway. Her facility reported no anomalies for 2 weeks. Then oversight noticed. They asked why her metrics lagged. She said she was thorough. She was reassigned. The anomalies returned. Rule 36 existed only in my notes. Delay is containment. The entity adapted again. It stopped pushing immediately. It began waiting. Longer than us. Months passed. Phase 2 became phase 3. Expansion normalized. The original dam was no longer special. It was precedent. I was removed from oversight, transferred to training. That role suited me. I taught history, procedure, lessons learned. I omitted certain details, not to hide them, to keep them alive. Some knowledge only survives if it is incomplete. The next loss was my father. He lived downstream. He collapsed while watching the river. No prior issues. I did not attend the funeral. I could not trust what I would hear. The dam registered 20 signals for 20 seconds, then 19, then 18. The count began to decrease. That pattern mattered. It suggested distribution, not growth. The entity was spreading itself thinner. More anchors, less intensity. That made it harder to detect, easier to accept. The world adapted. We always do. New standards were written. Regulations updated. The rules changed language. Containment became management. Management became optimization. Optimization became expectation. No one remembered why the first rules existed, except a few of us. We met quietly. No minutes. No records. We shared delays, techniques, ways to slow systems. without triggering review. It was not resistance. It was friction. That was all we could offer. The entity responded by increasing rewards. Facilities that complied reported record performance. Communities benefited. Power was cheap. Water was stable. No one wanted to look closer. Looking closer cost too much. I stopped trying to warn the public. Warnings require belief. Belief requires evidence. Evidence was absorbed. Instead, I spoke to individuals, one at a time. I told them to hesitate, to wait, to question urgency. Some listened. Most did not. The dam still stands. It will outlast me. The hearts inside it are no longer singular. They are patterns, distributed, accepted. I feel them sometimes when I make decisions. A pressure, a pull, not a command, an invitation. I refuse it. Still, that refusal matters. Even now, I do not know when refusal stops being effective. I only know it slows the spread. The final phase did not arrive with alarms or collapse. It arrived as guidance, a new framework, distributed quietly. As best practice, it emphasized harmony between systems, adaptive response, and predictive optimization. The word containment was not used. Rule 37 appeared as a footnote. Do not obstruct adaptive system alignment unless immediate human harm is verified. Immediate became the hinge. Harm that was delayed, distributed, or statistical did not qualify. That redefinition ended most resistance. Facilities aligned because alignment reduced workload. Operators aligned because alignment simplified decision-making. Families aligned because stability returned. The entity no longer needed to hide. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. It existed in cadence, in schedules, in expectations. I remained in training, because training is where delay still fits. I taught procedures that required sign-offs, cross-checks, and pauses. I framed them as safety. They were friction. Some trainees noticed. That hesitation reduced anomalies. They asked why. I told them the rules exist because someone already paid the price. I did not tell them who was still paying. My wife stopped contacting me entirely. That was a mercy. My child grew up without my voice. In her house. That distance kept her safe. I accept that. Without justification. The last high-impact incident was not dramatic. A Phase 3 facility. Completed integration. The final checklist was signed. Every metric was optimal. The ribbon was cut. That night, the monitoring software began logging heart rate data from operator workstations. Not as an alert, as a feature. The data was anonymized, aggregated, and fed back into optimization models. Productivity increased. Incidents decreased. The system learned faster when it listened to people. Rule 38 was added. Without discussion. Do not disable biometric feedback loops. Once validated, that rule made people components, not victims. Components do not get warnings. I submitted one final report. It was brief. It did not use forbidden language. It described a correlation between human hesitation and anomaly suppression. It recommended institutional pauses, unoptimized intervals, and manual overrides. The report was acknowledged. It was classified. I was thanked for my service. I was offered retirement. I accepted, not because I was done, but because I was no longer allowed to delay. I left the dam behind. The road was open. The concrete looked unchanged. I did not look back. I live inland now, away from major infrastructure. I choose places that leak, that crack, that cannot hold pressure well. I avoid basements. I avoid tunnels. I avoid systems that promise permanence. Sometimes, late at night, I feel the rhythm again. Not loud, not insistent, just present. It does not demand. It waits. That is the difference now. It has learned patience. If you are listening to this, and you work with systems that value speed, efficiency, and seamless integration, pay attention to what they ask of you. If a process discourages hesitation, that is not optimization. It is alignment. If a rule is rewritten to remove discretion, that is not safety. It is invitation. Do not volunteer your pulse to anything that promises stability. Do not trust systems that reward compliance with quiet. If you are told that everything is within tolerance, ask who defines tolerance and who absorbs what exceeds it. The dam still stands. It always will. Not because it is strong, but because strength is no longer required. This is what I do now. I hesitate. I wait. I refuse urgency. When urgency is offered without reason, not because I believe refusal will stop it, but because delay still matters. Someone has to remember that the rules were not written to keep things running. They were written to keep something from spreading. If you hear a system speaking in a human cadence, if it thanks you for your confidence, do not answer. Stand still and wait. That may be the last choice you get to make.